So this is Peridot from China. It's a pretty clean piece, and it's just under 10 carats. And this is what I'm going to use today for my cutting project. Comes from China. Did I say this piece of rough is pretty clean? Well, if you look closely, you can kind of see a twinkle. It's in about the center of the top part of that stone as I move it back and forth. Now that turned out to be a lily pad inclusion. Now lily pad inclusions are unique to Peridot, and they're called lily pad inclusions because they look like the aquatic plant, the lily pad. And these lily pads are formed, they're a combination of an inclusion and a stress fracture. The inclusion in the center of the stress fracture, unfortunately, is often a piece of another mineral, which often causes problems with polishing, as that other mineral just seems to scratch your facet or chip it. And the stress fracture also causes chipping and scratches when you're polishing. So lily pad inclusions, unique to Peridot. They show that it's natural Peridot, and they're kind of neat to look at. But they're a problem to polish, as I discover with this project. For this piece of Peridot, I'll use the design that I have cut before, and it's called the Old Mine Barion No. 1 by Robert Long. And here's the cutting instructions for this design, which you can also find on the web at the facetdiagrams.org site. It's a cool design, and I enjoy cutting it. So for my Peridot, I just need to grind a flat spot, and I'll use a 600 grit topper, and that the flat spot's what I'll attach my dop to so I can start cutting on this Peridot. And that'll work for a flat spot, and so I'll attach my dop. I used a 600 grit topper, and we'll be ready to start cutting on this Peridot. Okay, so the way I set up my transfer fixture to attach my stone to the dop is on the bottom part of the stone, the pavilion, that's not flat, so I put a piece of modeling clay, and you can buy a package of modeling clay for a couple dollars. Modeling clay, putty of some type, anything that kind of can be used to kind of mold around the bottom part of the stone, and it'll kind of hold the stone a little bit in place while you push the upper dop onto the flat part, and then you can just adjust the stone to where it's centered. I start with an oversized dop about the size of the stone, and then based on the shape of the stone, so this side all goes straight down, this side comes in, so I probably need, this little space, a little more space over here. Just kind of judge it the way you want to put the stone in there. Push the dop onto the stone, and then I'll replace this larger dop. That's just to help me center it. Then I'll replace it with the dop I'm going to use, and try to use the smallest dop you can, because if I end up cutting through inclusions and have a problem with the stone, I don't want to have to re-dop later if I cut it too small. So I'm going to use this dop, and this is a flat dop. So now that I've got the stone pushed down, I can just remove this dop gently, and the stone will stay in place because of the modeling clay. And I use my super glue, my UV light activated super glue, to glue the stone to the dop. So now I've got glue all the way around the dop, and I'm going to lift the dop up to get some of the glue underneath. Push it back down, and I should have glue all over the dop and the stone, so I'll use my UV activated light. And this super glue cures in about 2 seconds. And the good news is I can start cutting right away. I don't have to wait for any additional cure time. It's ready to go. This bottle of glue is almost gone. I haven't had any problems with it. And I don't keep it in the refrigerator because I'm using it so often. It's just not feasible, but I would, if I wasn't using it that often, I'd keep it in the refrigerator, but I don't know that you need to. I can feel that the super glue is set up, so we're ready to start cutting on this Peridot. Okay, to cut our design in with this Peridot, we want to put our Peridot into our machine, and it's going to be a kind of a square design, so not quite a square because there's two facets on each girdle on each side instead of one, but to be a square, you would orient the four sides at the 96, 48, 96, and the 24, 72 teeth. So you kind of decide how you want it to look square in there. And when you get it about where you think it's about right, you tighten up the drop retention screw, and we're ready to start cutting our Peridot. So just using the rougher topper laps, I've preformed our Peridot. I started with a 320 grit topper and then went to my 600 grit topper. So now I'll work with the 12M and start pre-polishing our Peridot. Okay, I've gone over our Peridot except for the very last row of facets. I've done all the other facets, except that last row cuts so fast, it's such a small facet that I'm not going to worry about it right now. Now the only thing I'd say is that the upper half of my stone, the amount of space that I have for the crown, which is found in your instructions, the C to W ratio, I'm right at having enough rough on the crown. Let me show you that. Okay, so the upper half is going to be right here, and you have to leave space for a girdle, and I generally put between 0.3 and 0.5 millimeters for a girdle. And then your instructions say that the C to W ratio is 0.148 times the width of your stone, and our stone's square, so the width on all sides is equal. But when I do the calculation, there's just barely enough space here for the upper half of the stone. And if I make the girdle, say, 0.5 or 0.6 millimeters wide, then we're out of the tolerance of the ratio of 1.48. But what I would say with this design is that doesn't matter. Now, why would I say that? Okay, so this design for the upper half of this design, it's a series of step cuts. So it doesn't matter that if you're very close, you're fine, because you're not going to have any problems with your facets meeting because you don't have enough space for the crown, because your facets don't meet. It's a step cut. All you have to do is determine by eye how much space you want between each step. And this design has 3 steps. You could put in 4 steps. You could put in 2 steps. So for this design, the C to W ratio doesn't matter too much. You want to be close to the C to W ratio or you're... I ran into some inclusions while polishing the bottom half of this Peridot. I was able to get stone polished with aluminum oxide on a tin lap, but on 2 of the problem facets, I ended up having to use a stationary lap and just sweep the stone with light pressure back and forth over the lap until it polished. So there were a couple of facets on the pavilion that really gave me a hard time to polish. And since this is Peridot, what concerns me is that means there's probably some lily pad inclusions typical of Peridot, which may have been the reason I had a hard time getting those couple of facets polished. So now I'm taking a closer look at the stone now that I've got most of it cut away, and I've pre-polished on the top part, and that right there is a lily pad inclusion, typical of Peridot. So let me see if I can get some more magnification on this. I've got my 10 times, 4 times, 2 times, and 1 time close-up lenses screwed in all together. So this is about the best I can get for magnification, 17 times. This is my stone right up 1 inch away from my lens. And that's the lily pad right there. That's a lily pad inclusion. And it's the light that's helping find this lily pad. If I move the light around, you can't see the lily pad. So it's the light helps reflect on the plane there where there's the crystal in the middle for the lily pad. Okay, so for a couple of the facets with this particular Peridot, I've been having problems. They just chip. So I'll try to polish it, it'll chip up. So I'll go back and pre-polish it, come back and try to polish it, and it'll form more chips. So what I'm going to do, this is pre-polished at 8,000 grit diamond on a zinc lap, and you can see that it's a pre-polish. If you look closely, you see little lines going up and down. They're like micro scratches. That's from the 8,000 grit. So what I'm going to do to polish it is use a stationary lap I use my tin lap with aluminum oxide. Okay, so this is my tin lap, and I've sprayed it. First I wet it as it was spinning around, and then I sprayed my aluminum oxide and water mixture on it. So I'm just going to leave the lap stationary and run the stone over the lap with the lap being stationary. And for some problem facets that works. So let's take a look at it. Okay, and that polished up that facet. So sometimes when nothing else works, just try a stationary lap and rub the stone over it, but make sure it's pre-polished very well first. Okay, I finished polishing our Peridot with my tin lap with aluminum oxide, and it's okay. I'm not real happy with the stone. It's been a lot of problems, but turning out okay. So now I need to set up the table to cut and polish the table, and then we'll be done with this Peridot, this problem Peridot. Okay, I finished polishing the table of our Peridot. So now I will soak it in the acetone and remove it from the top and weigh it, measure it, and send it off to BOPIE. Today I cut problem Peridot into an old mine design called Old Mine Barion No. 1. I am liking this design, and I do believe it's suitable for gem cutters of all skill levels. Normally I really enjoy cutting Peridot, but that's because I've always avoided purchasing Peridot that has any inclusions. And when Peridot doesn't have any internal issues, it cuts and polishes beautifully. However, when I purchased this piece of Peridot, I missed it. I didn't see any issues. I guess I just didn't examine the stone closely enough, because it has internal issues, including the dreaded lily pad-like inclusions. And these internal issues gave me a lot of problems. It takes a lot more time to cut and polish a gemstone Peridot with issues than it does to cut Peridot that's clean. Clean Peridot cuts and polishes beautifully, but again, these lily pad inclusions are a reason that I would recommend that new cutters just avoid purchasing Peridot until you have some cutting experience, and then I'd recommend passing up any included Peridot. Now, the technique that seems to work best for me for Peridot with inclusions, and a lot of stones with inclusions, is to use the lap stationary and just run the stone back and forth over a non-moving lap. That technique worked in this case, but the best technique to deal with lily pad inclusions is to develop your gem rough examining skills and avoid purchasing Peridot that has lily pad inclusions in the first place. So please let me know in the comments what you think of this design and what you think of cutting Peridot and this piece of Peridot. And as always, happy fasting, everyone.